have made an undertaking to recover the time, to finish on time. So the fifth block talks about Latin American experiences. I'm just going to say 4 or 5 things to set the scene, things that were said yesterday in the opening session and in the opening session. And then after setting the scene, we'll hear about the different situations in the countries of the people that are here with me. We talked about a contrasting system of waste management in Latin America, where we heard and we saw some graphs with leading-edge solutions, and the other with open landfills. 2% of the recovery of waste in Latin America is through formal systems, and the informal sector represents between 25 and 50%. And with the Inter-American Development Bank, they speak of some 4 million people who live off of the systems of waste management. We'll talk about this in Panama. It's a clear element in terms of waste management. Alfredo Rim talked about momentum, about the interesting change that was occurring from the point of view of the construction of the legal and governance structures. One of the panels this morning said that there are framework laws in place, but they have the problem of developing the regulations, the legislation from it, and problems with the system of governance. Once, the ministries are set up, to take it down to a local level is complicated. There was this gap which was hard to overcome. Figures in terms of the rate of coverage of refuse collection, very high, 98%. In virtually all Latin American towns, they have a waste collection service, but notwithstanding, from the point of view of local policy, only 20% of the town councils have some kind of waste handling system in place. And I think from what we were saying yesterday and today, I don't have experience in the Latin American continent, but I have kept an eye on it. Energy recovery seems to be, at least in a reasonably short-term horizon, something of interest, economically speaking, in terms of investment and profitability. And I think the energy vector disappears from the agenda. The question of landfills, the formal side, one of the priorities was then to adapt the informal sector, and governance is another of the priorities of the region. So we have 3 people with us here on the panel. First of all, we're going to hear from Argentina with Ricardo Bertolina. Ricardo, who is the executive director of the Argentinian network, and he is coordinator for the sustainability policies in the municipality of Rosario. Carlos spoke about this, about direct emissions, that despite the national inventory, the emissions were of little weight. Here in Spain, we're talking about 3 and 4, but those that are avoided through intelligent waste management system. Jose Gallego gave an example yesterday of the tin can, or the aluminium can, he was saying how we can avoid the use of raw materials, water, electricity, and so on and so forth. All of this action in terms of climate change is not something that is actually assigned to this sector. In Europe, the European Environmental Agency and the German Federal Agency says that the contribution of waste management in Europe could represent a reduction of up to 25-30% of diffuse emissions. if the management of waste is adequate. With Ricardo, we'll hear about that. We'll also hear about Brazil. Brazil is always referred to as a continent within a continent, 200 million people, fifth largest in the world in terms of waste generation. I believe that only 35% of the towns there have selective waste collection plans. We're talking about some 50,000 direct employees, an estimation of 600,000 in the informal sector, and notwithstanding only 30% of all of these townships, and this is one of the big problems, have a waste collection tax paid by the citizens. And we'll end up with experience 3, Panama. Carlos is the president of ABREPLE, an association of private and public companies in Brazil, and he's the vice president of ISWA. And we'll end up with a Lida Spadafora, their waste collection program 2015-2035, where social inclusion and collective responsibility seems to be one of the drivers for the design of this ambitious project. And then something which struck me, and I mentioned with him very briefly yesterday, here in Spain and in Europe, we talk about a horizon of 2030, 2035, if we're talking about the Paris commitments, but Panama speaks of an ambitious plan. We'll hear about it in detail together with the investments of 2015-2035. That sounds very good. It sounds ambitious, and we're very interested in hearing what Alida has to tell us about this. So with no further ado, please do stick to your assigned time. If we have time at the end, we'll field a round of questions. So whenever you're ready, Ricardo, the floor is yours. Good morning to you all. Thank you very much for having invited me. It's a pleasure for me to be again in a Relagres Congress, and particularly here in Spain. So, let me tell you that I've been working with waste management for some 30 years in Argentina, and basically, for much time, what we did was to work on waste in terms of eliminating contamination and involving the citizen. But for some years now, in terms of the new world agenda, which is related to climate change, we've seen a new thrust in terms of waste management. And the question of climate change is serving to strengthen the idea that we have in that respect. First and foremost, let's talk a little bit about the Argentinian network against climate change. Then we're going to talk about the inventories, the participation of emissions from the waste sector in Argentina, just as we've seen here in Europe. We're going to give you some facts and figures there. And then with waste, what the idea is with the waste management and what we're specifically doing today in Argentina with this new global agenda and the relationship between waste and climate change. When we're talking about the Argentinian municipal network against climate change, it's the first in Latin America. It started some 7 years ago, and today it comprises 130 townships of between 3,000 and 1.2 million inhabitants in different points in the country. We're talking about some 9 million people who live in the towns that make up this network, and today it's coordinated by the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, which is the largest organization there is, which is a combination of the Bloomberg organization and the Pact of European Mayors. In that respect, just a month ago, we kicked off an approach to learning the work that has been done in the European townships, and this is helping us to very quickly update our agenda in Argentina. One of the first things that we've done in Argentina is the inventory of local greenhouse gases. It's very hard to look at the participation of local government in climate change unless you have a local diagnosis of the situation. And in this respect, we developed a method some 3 years ago, and we showed the local governments how to develop their own greenhouse gas inventories. With an agreement with ICLE, we've developed the GCP system, which is the universal system, and some 80 townships have done it in Argentina, and therefore making it comparable to other local governments around the world. When towns joined the global covenant, they show the world what they're doing. They give an inventory and they show the risk plan for each of them and how they're adapting to climate change, and they have to present their plan to tackle climate change. And that's the direct relationship here that we have with waste management. The commitment on these 3 points: each township that joins the Global Covenant commits to develop these plans in 3 years. So all local governments that participate in the Argentinian network undertake to make what they are doing visible in terms of what they're doing to combat climate change. And here we can see the emissions per hectare of each of the towns, the per capita emissions, and all of the factors that involve the generation of greenhouse gas. The greenhouse gas inventories were performed in some 70 towns, and here we can see the national average of greenhouse gas, which is 9.83 in Argentina, and we see how each of the townships that has performed an inventory has different levels of emission. And it's very important because we, like other countries, have our national inventory, but if a town doesn't know what the driving factors are for the generation of greenhouse gases on a local level, it's very hard for them to make political decisions to help reduce such emissions. When we see these charts, there are towns that, compared to the national average, generating 5 times more. And in the case of Argentina, this is closely related to the agricultural sector. And now we're going to see this, but waste management, in some cases, is responsible for some 20% of the emissions of a particular area. We're going to see, as we're going to see now, the national average is very different. This is the level of participation of waste in Argentina in terms of the generation of greenhouse gas. In Europe, we've seen that it's some 2-3%. In Argentina, we're talking about 4%. And here we can see the 4 factors that define the national inventory, that is to say, where greenhouse gases are generated. As you know, in terms of waste, such emissions come above all from 2 sectors. One is the processing of solid waste, 49% of emissions, and 50.8% of emissions correspond to wastewater, and only 0.2% is related to incineration. As we can see, and as has been said previously in the case of Argentina, it's not a particularly relevant sector, even though I insist for local governments, it is of great importance in terms of developing strategies to reduce local emissions. As you know, greenhouse gas emission in terms of waste treatment is related above all to the generation of methane through, in general, anaerobic processes that occur. You know that methane is actually 18 times stronger, the effect of it, than carbon dioxide. So we need to reduce the emission of these greenhouse gases, and that's why we are looking at the same inverted pyramid that we talked about in one of the previous meetings, where the main problem that we have to deal with is prevention. As was said clearly before, the consumption of raw materials and energy during the process of manufacturing of goods, if we can reduce that, we will impact emission, this 4% that we were talking about, but also we could avoid far more locally in terms of what we're able to do in the prevention of the generation of greenhouse gases. When we talk about prevention in our towns, and Barcelona was a clear example for us, there's an enormous number of programs that we're developing in our townships to avoid waste generating greenhouse gases. And as I say, this is the first target that we've set ourselves on a municipal level, particularly accelerating participation from our local inhabitants, the citizens. We have the Repare program in Rosario, where we are encouraging people to reuse resources rather than go out and buy new clothes, new machines, home appliances, and so on and so forth. This means avoiding buying new shoes, new clothes, new appliances, and extending the life of what we've already got. Virtually all of the network, the towns in the network have eliminated the use of plastic bags. We're returning to the use of cloth bags, and in terms of recycling, we're also encouraging that. Okay, the second point that we've looked at is the generation of energy from waste. Unfortunately, in Argentina, biodigestion is not such a big affair, but there are certain towns that have developed their own biodigesters to deal with the organic fraction of waste. In this case, and we heard about this yesterday in terms of the township of Cerrito, the township of Emilia, where not only are they converting the waste into energy and biogas, not just domestic waste, but also the waste from the agricultural sectors in each of the towns. This is the clearest option that there is for our towns. We're talking about basically small towns and villages in Argentina that are looking at this kind of technology, a biodigester. If we're talking about towns of 10,000 inhabitants, we're talking about a cost of some $10,000. So it's not too much money, and can also involve the citizens in it. There are different organizations such as Rotterdam universities who have provided funds. One town was actually financed by the German consul, ensuring that the town properly engages in selective collection. You can see the cases of methane where there is a very low release of methane, but here, above all, we're locally generating energy to cover all that the town requires. What we're talking about in terms of a biodigester, it's a very low release of methane, and the methane is converted into carbon dioxide, and this is considered biogenic, and so is not part of the calculation. The third alternative in terms of waste management, and this is what we're seeing at the moment, in terms of the different depth landfills. As you've seen and as we have heard about in different countries in the region, according to the IPCC, depending on the depth of the landfill, the emissions will vary. And if it's a sanitary landfill with or without combustion, we get a different level of greenhouse gases. So it depends on the system we're using. In fact, today, without a doubt, we have to eliminate landfills. That's the proposal. In Argentina, most sanitary landfills do not have gas capturing systems as a source of energy. What we've done in these 70 towns where we've worked, you can see it in this graph, we've seen the per capita generation of greenhouse gases, that's the red dots, and according to the level of emission, that's the height of the column, and the color is the kind of waste treatment that is engaged in. So, according to the form of processing and generation, we can see that there's different levels of greenhouse gases. That's what we were saying at the beginning. Not all towns have the same levels of greenhouse gas emissions, but there are many factors that come into play which determine how we have to tackle the problem. Given this, our towns have put out a call, and what the idea is for all of the towns to have their climate action plan, how they are going to go out and reduce the greenhouse gas emission, and this is updated every 2 years. The first inventory was carried out in 2014, the next one will be 2016, and that by year end we'll have all of the data for this, and on the basis of this, the local climate action plans are developed. What we did not so long ago was to hold a meeting in Buenos Aires with 83 towns and mayors attending. Each mayor presented 3 projects which were posted on the internet, made visible, and companies from all over the world, embassies, cooperation organizations, stated their interest in providing solutions for the projects that the towns were engaged in. And together with this, we had 300 simultaneous meetings, each mayor with a counterpart who offered them different technologies. In general, the mayors were more than satisfied with the corporate proposals they received from the different players who were at the meeting, because they reveal the next steps to be being taken. Above all, they were talking about figures. One of the mayors said, well, how much is this going to cost us? So they started looking at numbers, looking for the different alternatives they required within the framework of the climate action plans. When we told them that each of the mayors presented, when I said that each of the mayors presented 3 projects, what we can see is that of the 132 assessed, of those projects assessed, I'm going to wind up now, yes. This is to do with the generation of waste. The rest is to do with sustainable management, agriculture, cattle raising. So the percentage of projects that concerns the mayors with regard to climate change. The second was waste management. Of this, 68 projects, of which 46 were directly related to waste, but 11% were related to the energy valorization of the waste. A few years ago, they weren't even on the agenda. Today, it is something which concerns our local government to see how in waste management they can include energy valorization. So basically, that is what we're doing. The results of the inventories, the conclusions, incorporating a new motive to treat waste properly. Today, the mayor, when they go out to talk about waste management, they do so within the framework of the Climate Action Plan. They tell us why we have to work with waste and how that is related to climate change. There aren't going to be any more sanitary landfills. We need to eliminate them. It's a complete waste of resources, and this is on the agenda for all our townships. It's not sufficient to manage pollution. What we need to do is to generate energy and employment. We were talking about this throughout the day, the generation of green work, green jobs. The policies aimed at prevention are the most important in terms of the generation of greenhouse gases, and composting at home competes with energy generation. It's important because it stimulates citizen participation, and we need to pay particular attention to the energy valorization of waste treatment, as I mentioned before. So thank you very much for your attention. Very good. Thank you very much, Ricardo. I didn't introduce myself before. My name is Leandro Barquin. I'm director of the Ambiental Foundation, and we are responsible for the organization, the technical secretariat of this Relagres meeting. Let me just remind you, we insist a lot on this, but some people seem, there have been a few problems in terms of times. Tomorrow, we're going to organize a visit for the Relagres delegation at 9. The coach will pick you up at the Ateneo Hotel, which is in front of the beach. They're waiting for us in Gavà Viladecans at 10 o'clock in the morning for the pack sorting plant, a definite landmark plant in terms of this sort of waste treatment in the metropolitan area of Barcelona and in Spain. At the end of the visit, we're going to be having a working meeting with the Barcelona Metropolitan Area Organization, with politicians and managers, to see what is done in the Barcelona metropolitan area in terms of waste management. And then after that, those of you that have a flight in the afternoon and have your bags in the coach will drop you at the airport, and the coach will go through Barcelona if anyone wants to go sightseeing in Barcelona, and then come back to Metro. Having said that, now, thank you for your attention. We're going to go on to Experience 2, Brazil, Shared Responsibility and Public-Private Cooperation. Carlos Silva, President of Abrelpe and Vice President of Israel. The floor is yours, sir.
So much for your invitation. It is always a pleasure to be here in Barcelona at this event organized by Relagres, and to be able to contribute something to this discussion and to exchange information and experiences between Spain, Latin America, and of course we have a lot of commonalities. I'm going to speak about our experience in terms of waste management. What are some of the challenges, prospects, and possibilities? Our starting point is the National Act on Solid Waste. It was a federal law adopted in 2010, which is our lighthouse nowadays, guiding waste management policies in Brazil. This law shows us the principles, the goals to be attained, and of course, everything that was in place before 2010 had to be properly streamlined and transformed in order to comply with this law. It is quite a modern piece of legislation. It contemplates possible ways forward, possible futures. There are also ambitious principles contained in the law. For instance, there's a distinction to be made between refuse and waste, according to the law. Therefore, there's also a difference between the end goal or end destination of that particular waste and the final disposal. So when we say that type of waste is collected and then sorted and dumped into a landfill, we need systems that allow us to remediate and to recover and to make the proper use of this waste. We also have a law that contemplates the end of any unit for waste management that does not comply with that legislation. Open landfills are to be shut down and dismantled. The law in Brazil also establishes a hierarchy in terms of waste types. This principle is based on a European principle. Therefore, there are several actions that need to be fully implemented, but following this hierarchy, starting with prevention, non-generation, reuse, recycling, recovery and treatment, and at the very end of this process, the disposal of any waste. The law also imposes a planning process at every single level, the federal, state, and municipal level. There must be waste management plans in place. And of course, all of these different political institutions need to also implement what we call reverse logistics, which is the way that we interpret this principle of polluter pays, or the producer pays. This was quite an innovation for Brazilian law. We have what we call shared responsibility principle, which is slightly different to extended responsibility, which is in place in Europe. We have this shared instead of expanded or extended responsibility, and I'll dwell on it a little bit further. Since we implemented this law, there are some key points, some key issues that need to be worked upon. Stronger emphasis need to be put on those issues. Let's see exactly which of these issues are a priority. First, we have a growing generation of waste. We have 207 million inhabitants, 85% of which live in urban areas. Brazil is one of the countries that with the highest urbanization rates in the world, which means that we had 79.9 million tons of municipal solid waste in 2015. And as I said before, Brazil is the fifth country that generates more waste in the world. And this has been so since 2005. There's been an increase of 25% of waste generation since that year. And this period embraces 2005 all the way to 2015, so 10 years in which this generation of waste has kept growing. What are the prospects for the future in Brazil? By 2030, we're talking about 228 million citizens. Now, if this means that waste will continue to grow, we'll probably have about 90 million tons of urban solid waste a year in our country by 2030. So along the same lines of growing generation, if we compare 2010, the year in which this National Solid Waste Act was adopted, we had 195,090 tons every day of solid waste or urban solid waste. But in 2015, which is the latest data, 218,874 tons a day. So you can compare what has happened since this law was passed. We started working on prevention. before that, nothing had been done on that particular front. And that's why we keep increasing generation rates. Now, the second issue that needs to be dealt with is that sometimes this waste is taken to a site that is not the most adequate. We have nearly 3,000 open dumpsters or landfills in Brazil, and nearly 40% of our municipalities use this kind of irregular landfills or dumpsters. We're talking about 34,000 tons a day. 42% of our waste is dumped onto these garbage sites. And according to our own studies at Abrelpa, we're talking about 76.5 million inhabitants that are impacted and suffer from these policies of just dumping garbage, dumping trash onto these irregular sites. And that has a yearly cost, both environmentally and from a health point of view, of nearly 11 billion reals a year. Of course, environmentally speaking, this has repercussions, but also health impacts of this inadequate policy, soil pollution, water pollution, and that cost is very high. And of course, our country must pay for that every year just to keep those open dumpsters running. The third issue that needs to be considered when we talk about waste management and the law is what we call integrated management. We keep working so that this management system is more and more integrated every day. Unfortunately, that's not the case yet. We have a linear waste management model. After consumption and discarding or eliminating that waste, all of it is processed as refuse and is sent to these inappropriate dumpsters. So in terms of numbers, when we talk about recycling today in Brazil, out of nearly 80 million tons a year, we have 1 million ton of what we call the dry fraction, which is recycled in Brazil. And then we have 400,000 tons a year of organic fraction that is composted. So it's quite a broad spectrum that still needs to be developed. Then there's this fourth issue, which to us is key, and we actually believe is the most important of them all, is funding. How do we finance, how do we fund all of these new projects? Well, this is quite a concern for us, those of us who work on waste management systems in Brazil, because Brazilian cities are investing today nearly 10 reals per person per month in order to cover all the costs involved in solid waste management systems. So we're talking about collection, cleaning, transfer, and usage, as well as the preservation and cleaning of parks and public squares and marketplaces. All of the services that municipalities consider to be cleaning and sanitation and waste management have a cost of 10.15 reals, so approximately 3 euros per person per month, to be able to pay for all of these services. And in Brazil, that means you cannot even afford 2 cups of coffee. So they are more expensive than that, with only 10 reals and 15 cents. That's as much as you can get. If we compare this to other public services, well, they are much more expensive. We could talk about cell phone services. Pretty much every citizen owns a mobile phone, and the amount they pay every month is much more expensive than just 10 reals. Everyone has internet access at home, and they also pay more than that. So this cost is quite reasonable and affordable for all municipalities. However, citizens are not ready yet to pay that extra cost. However, what we try to tell them is that if we do not improve from that point of view over the short run, our services will collapse. Cities will have a lot of problems and they won't be able to maintain them, to keep them running, and to invest in them for the future. What are the possible roads ahead of us? Well, we should start thinking about solutions that are adapted to the local reality. Of course, towns and cities need to work on their own management plans and to include in those plans a solution that is adaptable and realistic. Sometimes that means that the landfill must be shut down, or the informal dumpster should be shut down, and to have a proper sanitary landfill to treat their waste. Or sometimes maybe just a simple system will suffice to reuse organic waste, because in some areas in Brazil, organic waste 75% accounts for 75% of urban waste. So we need to come up with simple solutions and not just to roll out and implement this hierarchical principle, thinking about prevention, which sometimes takes many years. It might take very long, and throughout that time, the dumpster will continue to pollute the soil and water and rivers in the city. When speaking about Brazil, we need to think about improving our legal and financial safety and security so that those services can be implemented over the long run. And this is a very current discussion. Communication is essential in order to improve social involvement. If citizens do not adhere to the system, if citizens do not actively participate in the system, any initiative designed by cities will not be successful because, of course, citizens are a key stakeholder in this system for any waste management model to be a success. So, as I said, we need to keep working on specific mechanisms to implement and to invest in infrastructures, but also so that we can help those solutions become more long-term solutions. And there's a daily cost that needs to be paid every day, every week. These units have a cost in order to run and to expand their capabilities. But sometimes we talk about the cost of inertia, of just keeping dumpsters running the way they are right now. And that cost is twice the cost that is needed to resolve this problem. But on top of everything we have said so far, we could speak about circular economy, of rezoning policies, end-of-waste criteria, and smart cities, which are part of our mayor's agendas, but also the agendas of our companies and municipalities, and therefore they should all be properly implemented. Now, for all of this to be feasible, so that we can all obtain proper results, these systems need to be implemented on the basis of partnerships. And that is the 17th goal of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And the whole waste management industry requires those alliances, those partnerships to be in place. Of course, they may be of a very different nature, but there is no possible solution for waste management problems that can be implemented by one single stakeholder, a city, a company, or a provincial government, or a federal government. In Brazil, those partnerships can be implemented through what we call shared responsibility principle. I did mention that at the beginning. That means having manufacturers, importers, distributors, but also sellers, consumers, and the owners of those utility services. They all share part of the responsibility of the whole waste management system. And then, of course, public-private partnerships that are increasing in Brazil. That means sharing risks between the public and the private sector. we're talking about projects that are based on the value for money principle and with a high return on their investment in new sites, which is recovered over the long run. And finally, reverse logistics. This means the need to implement some kind of a product and return system so that they can use those materials in industrial systems. We have reverse logistics for agrochemical products, residues, packaging, batteries, tires, for packaging in general, and also for drugs. What are some of the positive impacts that we consider for the next few years? Well, if we analyze the makeup of those residue materials, organic material accounts for 51.4%, so we can do a lot more to improve that. There's still a huge area for recycling to be used, 31.9%, and then other refuse, 16.7%, where new materials can also be recovered and worked upon. So we're talking about huge volumes. There's still a long way to go, and we should make good use of it. What is part of today's agenda? Well, we need to rethink how we manage our waste and to somehow strike a balance, because we can see on one side what we throw away, what we toss away as waste, and then on the other side, our planet, the planet that we want to improve and get back somehow. That's why in ISWA we will be holding the national conference to be held in Baltimore, and it will be called No Time to Waste. We have no time to keep wasting time discussing about issues that never end, keeping our regular dumpsters open and using a lot of our resources with no possible return. Thank you so much for your attention. And let me just ask you for a final favor. If possible, please support our ISWA campaign to close the 50 largest dump sites in the world. This campaign is available if you visit our website at ISWA, the ISWA. So just give us your signature in support of this campaign. And by 2030, we hope to be able to shut down these 50 largest dump sites where most of the pollution produced on our planet is located. Thank you so much.
Very much, Carlos. Please God, we can do this soon, close these 50 largest landfills in the world. And now we're going to wind up with Panama, Experience 3, a leader, the Zero Waste Program 2015-2035. The floor is yours, madam. Thank you very much. Good morning to you all, and I'd like to thank Relagres, the organizers, Jaime Agari, the Chileans who are on the northern route. Thank you very much for your excellent company. So, let's see if I can work out how this thing works. All right. The Zero Waste Program in Panama City is a new program, and I'm going to tell you what we're doing and how we're doing it. Let me talk to you first of all about the situation in Panama. It's a metropolitan area of some million inhabitants, while the metropolitan area is virtually twice as big. Ours is a country which has had significant economic growth in the region, some 8%, one of the highest rates in the world, leading to a large amount of consumption and waste of materials, so a lot of waste generation. So it's a Panama of contrast. Very close to us, we have this waste, plastic, in the woodlands, the mangroves, and a lot of waste ends up in the natural ecosystem, leading to problems such as flooding health, bad smells. It's a rather serious problem that we have in Panama City. This was last year. So let's see if I can make this work. You can see here, all of this area is waste that's come down the river. And you can see this on a video on YouTube, the San Andres River in Panama, and it went viral, this video, and alerted everyone to the serious problem that we've got. Since 2014, we've had a health warning out because the waste is also a problem that generates focuses of infection, mosquitoes. We've got microcephalia, like in Brazil, the Zika virus, sanitary, in inverted commas, landfills, which is a focus of infection in Panama City. We don't do anything with the methane or with the lixivates, heavy metals, plastics all ends up in the sea, and we all know about that. In terms of human health, we had a huge fire for several days 5 years ago. Just imagine the dioxins that were generated around Panama City. There were whole districts of the town severely affected with problems of allergy, respiratory problems due to this fire. Okay, how much do we produce? Or how much reaches the landfill? 2,000 tons per day, 59,000 tons a month, and it's all mixed. Electronic waste, up until recently, we had different loads. The General Secretary has informed me now that that does not occur anymore, that it's going to a processing plant, and that's also a problem because they're not ready for it. Tires, hundreds and hundreds of tires a day, polluting everything because there's no kind of sorting or management, and a high percentage of this waste is recyclable and would actually have market value if it were not contaminated. Our waste generation, according to the Inter-American Development Bank, it's 1.2 kilos per inhabitant per day. I don't source or final disposal. If it is final disposal, it could be a bit slanted. Here, the Inter-American Development Bank shows Panama as one of the highest in terms of per capita generation. This is Chile. My Chilean colleagues in this study, which didn't cover all of the cities, we're pretty much on a level there. So the mix of our waste is largely made up by organic waste, then plastic. In this study, which was carried out by JICA, which needs to be updated, it shows plastic at 12%, but I'm sure that's higher now. Glass, which is a problem. We don't have a market for plastic and glass in Panama. Therefore, they're just chucked everywhere. Plastic, let's talk about plastic. How much is coming into Panama in 2015? This was research done by a consultancy firm employed by the Ministry of the Environment. This year, we're talking about an entry of 143.6 million tons in all different forms, bottles, different forms, which corresponds to 22,622 elephants worth of plastic, or 5,518 40-foot containers. All of that plastic comes into Panama. Where does most of it end up? In the landfill, and a lot of it ends up in the sea. So here, it doesn't reach you, but this is in the Pacific. And you know that there's that huge island of plastic floating around in the Pacific, but also in Panama, on the Caribbean side, there's a lot of waste as well. which maybe reaches you, well, not here because we're in the Mediterranean, but anyway. And this is the forecast. If the trend continues, the amount of plastic reaching Panama will increase up to some 250,000, 250,000 tons in 2025. And we've got to turn this around. Okay, the background to the program, 2008, 2009, through the cooperation of the ABINA organization. This chap here, Roberto Cavallina, and my foundation, ANCON, and Agua y Juventud, which is another movement. We developed the zero waste strategy where we involved the local council, the recycling firms, corporations. It was a wonderful experience, and from that, we developed the first of our strategic lines for our program. But what happened in 2010? Due to a health crisis, the national government took on by law the waste collection of all of the towns and the management of waste, starting in Panama City. It was never able to go on to the other towns. In 2014, Panama City Council, even though it still didn't have the responsibility for waste management because it was taken away from it in 2010, calls me to work together with the current mayor to coordinate the Waste Zero plan. So it was a special program. In 2015, by law, the responsibility for waste collection and selection was returned to the local authorities, but there was a negotiation between the presidency and the local mayors for the responsibility to go to the local authorities. This is the program 2015-2035, a 20-year horizon, which was done in parallel with another city action plan, which was an Inter-American Development Bank project. And according to this, the first problem that Panama citizens were facing, what they considered to be the greatest problem, is the problem of refuse. And here it speaks of how to tackle the problems of waste. At the same time, and in terms of the same time scale, we see the appearance of the Zero Waste Program. Well, what's interesting here is that it was a municipal agreement that approved this on September the 1st, 2015, and set the legal framework for the program. We also put out a tender for our logo type because it had to be something that the citizens could feel that they had ownership for. And these are the principles which guide us, the principle of the circular economy and the hierarchization that you can see there.
So earlier, and the goal, of course, is to reduce the waste that is sent to this final disposal, as well as a per capita reduction of 10%. Or let's say the waste that is sent to that final disposal. And by 2035, that might sound like quite ambitious. But also a minimum of 50% of recyclable material should also be reused or recycled. It's quite ambitious. I mean, this this board that is in charge of this project was the result of a lot of participatory initiatives with universities and companies and citizens and institutions from the central government as well as NGOs. So it was quite a broad participatory process. And then we had some technical meetings as well, where the goals and indicators were defined, were established, and then the outcomes to be obtained. And all of this is the product of that particular seminar. A lot of people involved in finding the right solutions, working on that hierarchy. Those are the 5 items that were selected, quite similar to the strategy we worked on with Ricardo. The team started working. The team well, I have to say that first I was working on my own, but then there were two, then three people of a technical background, one person in charge of awareness raising, another one for logistics, market economy. I'm in charge of the follow-up and monitoring, as well as the regulatory part of the business. There are 15 people in the team right now, and we keep expanding, especially for educational initiatives. We are working on the main streets as well as in bike lanes and trade fairs, and we try to be very present. An important decision that was made is every time that a container was set up, we had to educate the people and to counsel them, to advise them. That was very important. Everyone said, first, awareness raising. That is a priority. We also worked with schools, offering training to teachers, and then a lot of fairs, more than 70 last year, working with children, young people, their families. We also organized different educational activities in the neighborhood, and also at the city hall. We need to be a reference. We had an internal collection system. We need to keep educating our collaborators. It's quite difficult because there are more than 4,000 people working at the city hall in Panama. There was a warehouse because, of course, whatever we cannot process is kept there. And there have been former governors and other people working there. Of course, the social dimension is extremely important so that we can reach out to the most vulnerable citizens. This is also quite fundamental. It is important in terms of sustainability. We had a public-private partnership set up with the National Brewery and the Ancien Institution, which is the waste management institution that answers to the Department of Health, our mayor, Mr. Valdon, and an NGO representative. So 4 parties. And this was quite helpful. So that we could keep working on sustainability for the whole project. We are about to sign an agreement with the Tocumen Airport and Ecopa Airlines because they are part of this pilot plan, and this is quite important for them. There's a danger in terms of birds flying close to the airport and their waste. Let me just show you where we are located. This is Panama. This is Panama City, and this is our capital district. As you can see, it has the shape of an S, not running north to south. Colombia is on our west, and Colombia to the east. As you can see, this is the Central America, and we're working on 3 districts. This is the first one, a professional district with an initiative in place by the National Brewery, and this is the area of the Panama Canal catchment area. There was a partner already active in the area with a lot of environmental education, with woods and forests that need to be protected, where waste can be quite an obstacle for that canal. Therefore, it was key to include all of these areas to rectify these actions. They're part of the pilot plan and part of the 24 districts that make up the capital district, and with the local representatives and that are closest to our citizens.
Here we find Tocumen, where we could have significant partners, and in fact they are joining the pilot plan for the private-public cooperation scheme. Then here we have the recycling plants in Britannia Village. On Google Map, you can put in basura cero, zero waste, and this is where it will take you. Now there are some 6 which should also be on Google Map. We also have our mobile collection points with all of the messages, where we're always trying to create and breed a new awareness of this. Then also in the places that we're working, it's key to work with the citizens, to have a notable presence, even though we're not there 24 hours, to talk to people about the waste, how they should select waste separated at home. And then we also have a door-to-door awareness plan around the districts that we're working in. Then we also hold local meetings where also through an office, which is the Citizen Inquiry Office, we talk to people to ask them what they want and where they want to have their green points, their selective collection points. This is the first thing that we did because, first of all, the people in Reki village rejected it. They said, yes, I want to recycle, but I don't want the recycling point in front of my house. This is always the not in my backyard problem that everyone faces. So then we held a public inquiry. Then we set up 5 more. Now we've got 6, and they're being managed and run and monitored by the local communities. Because they are under the responsibility of a church, some kind of collective organization, ensuring that they do not become problems, that people, just dump whatever there. And also the NGO has established a collection point. And this is the NGO collection place, which is part of the public-private cooperation. 2 minutes, okay. We've also got a composting program which we want to take round to the schools, the communities, the companies, to show people how to compost. Also, we are setting up kitchen gardens, vertical kitchen gardens. This is a project that we're working with the penitentiary system, which we work together with the local council. Here, the prisoners, over 600 people recycling in an awful, filthy, disgusting place. Now it's clean, and they are using the money they've got to help to finance the penitentiary system. Very rustic, very basic. They're doing this, crushing the cans one by one. But it's so successful that the penitentiary system has done the same thing for the women's prison. And here you can see how they're using this to work as a wall for the kitchen gardens, making brooms out of them, composting, growing flowers. It's so beautiful, the place now, with the bottle caps. Look what they're doing with these mosaics. If they work 2 days, the prisoner, they are released 1 day earlier. So it's a great thing for them. For every 2 days' work, a day is taken off of their sentence. So we've fostered the Panama Recycling Chamber. We established its bylaws, set it up, and today it's up and running, and it's a key organization. We're working with a waste exchange where people can exchange waste through a website, which is going to be connected to an American center. We're bringing together restaurants and others that have food waste, food that can be reused. This is a park that we are building. We're working on an internal recycling system. The food waste is a very serious problem. Over 50 tons a day between the 3 public markets that go to a sanitary landfill. It's completely illogical. And we're also working on a recycling plan for the waste food. We're working together with Britain on this, with an organization called RAP, working with food waste. Here too, from Barcelona County Council, we're receiving technical assistance through the Central University of Catalonia. We're working with them on waste treatment plants. We are certifying companies through a protocol that we developed with the Clean Production, the National Clean Production Center for Panama. And the companies are also able to show their CRP in terms of this. They have to develop a plan, a diagnosis. They have to meet the plan, and then we certify it. And then I don't know if you can help me to run this, the technicians. Mireia, I just wanted you to hear our jingle. We play this at the different fairs. I'm not sure. Great, okay. If you click on the link there, it should run. No, it won't run? Just accept. This was a charitable organization of musicians that wrote our jingle. We can't hear it.
Reutilizar, reciclar. ¡Hey! 3 R's que no puedes olvidar. Jamás, jamás. Basura cero, redúcela primero. Dale un futuro a la ciudad de Panamá.
So that's all from Panama City. Thank you very much. Also, we developed a little TV spot, which has been shown quite a lot. We're doing some more. Could you run this? Could you help me to run this little video clip, please? One day I realized that waste has its own life. And wherever I went, it was there. And what was going on? Waste wasn't dying. And then I discovered the 3 R's. Now I take my own bag when I go shopping and I buy just what I need. I find new uses for things. I don't throw them away. It helps me to save. The old clothes, old toys, I donate them. If at the end of the day I have to chuck things, I selectively do it. Glass, plastic, aluminium. Don't let your waste turn into garbage. Reduce, repair, recycle. Just to wind up. Oops. Could I go back to my presentation now, please? So we have indeed learned that public-private alliance means we have to work together, we have to work with people. People are our best partner, and people have to see us out there in the street. We have to be out there with them. This has been a fantastic piece of learning. Then we have to work on the regulations. We have no legal framework. We have different white papers. I am an acting parliamentarian. We have a proposal based on what was done in Brazil, in Costa Rica. We have the proposal, but the government is not interested at the moment. We're working as hard as possible. We want to have local ideas, but we do not have the authority in our local authorities. We can develop, regulations, but it's hard to enforce them. We have institutional challenges of an increasing scale. We have to take on collection, selective collection. It would simplify the program greatly. And that's it. Okay. These are the tons that we've saved through the program. At the moment, it's just symbolic. But, of course, financial resources, it's not easy. We've asked the Inter-American Development Bank to help us, but it's hard for them to help us with things like the diagnosis, the characterization, the correctional action. There's a national survey being carried out, but we have to make it more detailed. And I have been talking to Alfredo, and we hope he's going to help us with this, with the statistics, the monitoring, so we know where we stand, to certify the first companies, to expand the pilot plan after 2019, in short. All of these are significant challenges. Now that Alfredo is here, I know there's lots of multilateral banks here, the CAF, the World Bank, our colleagues from the UN. We have to take a further step in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have to follow the path of the circular economy. We need to diversify the system. Sanitary landfills, yes, we are collecting the garbage. We need to selectively dose. I learned from the Catalan agency, with their technical help, that 30 years ago you started here and the director said to us, we made an enormous mistake and I want you to learn from it. And I said, we didn't tackle organic waste from the beginning. We have to do it. We have to remove organic waste from the flow, and that resolves a great problem. Yes, you need processing plant, but we also need to work with the people, as our colleague Carlos said. And so these multilateral agencies also have a role to play in terms of the ministers of economy, presidents. We need experts from all over the world, from Europe, from Asia, to talk to them, because we need to change our approach in Latin America. And if the multilateral banks and the UN don't help us along this road, it becomes harder for us. We can't all come to Europe. You who have the know-how, the knowledge, you have the instruments, please help us, follow us along the road, help us to find other solutions, not just sanitary landfills and garbage collection. We need to reduce consumption too, and that's very hard to convey to our citizens, but that we have to do. And so with that, I'll say farewell to you, and please forgive me, but I really do feel a great passion for this all. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Alida,
so much, Alida, for your presentation, for your courage, and thank you for this call for action. So this is the end of this block. We would love to have some time for a Q&A. Unfortunately, we are running very late, so if you allow me, we'll move on to the next block and speak about European experiences. Thank you so much.
Dos de las intervenciones que vienen a continuación serán en inglés.
Two of the next speakers will speak in English, so if anyone in the room needs a translation headset, so you can pick them up as you come into the room. Thank you. We'll start in a minute.